Welcome back to the Annie Fry Show. It's Tuesday. We're grateful that you're here with us this afternoon. Very cold in St. Louis, but it's getting warmer. It's all the way up to 12 degrees. So I guess you could take that jacket off now. We watched the Iowa caucus last night. We prepped you for it. And last night, Donald Trump comes through with a resounding 50% plus victory. Close second place close with Nikki Haley, second place to DeSantis. And now we move to New Hampshire, and we'll continue to cover it as the events continue to unfold. While all the politics are going on, there are major events happening in our world that will have a great deal of effect on who we choose in November to be the next commander-in-chief if we decide to go with more of the same. And that's why we bring our friend Jim Carafano onto the show, the senior counselor to the president and E.W. Richardson Fellow for International Engagement at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, welcome back. Good to have you here.
Hey, can I ask a serious question?
You can ask any questions.
So I've heard that intro maybe 10,000 times.
Maybe.
Is that the intro to the hour, or do you do that for this? Do you do the same intro every hour of the show?
Every hour of the show. We do the same.
So
intro.
It's always the same. Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right.
So that's,
I got it.
Yep.
I could do it by memory.
Well, I love that. Thank you. Every once in a while, I meet some moms who listen to us in the afternoon, and their kids can do it, and it warms my heart to hear that. So it's just a credit to how long you've been with the show and how much we value you. Especially with these issues that are taking place right now with these Houthi attacks. I need you to just define some bold-faced words for us in our textbook so that people who are following along at home and are wondering the stakes for this November election and who's going to be our commander-in-chief. Who are the Houthis? How is Yemen involved? Who does Iran support? Yep. Who's attacking whom? Lay it out for us.
Yeah, so this is a classic kind of, problem of a state that's kind of carved out by drawing a line. So Yemen is kind of on the tip of the peninsula of Saudi Arabia there. The border between them is actually not even defined, it's just open desert. And Yemen is a state that is a combination of different ethnic groups. And so the Houthis are an ethnic group, and they were basically rebelling at war with the central government. So essentially you had this war between the North and the South, just kind of like the American Civil War. And what happened was over time, the Saudis came into the world. They tried to, because it was, disrupting. It was bad for them too. And the Houthis actually then turned to support from Iran, and they opened the door to Islamist groups from all over the world. So you had ISIS, Al Qaeda, everybody else flew into Yemen, and the reason why they did that, of course, is the Iranians want to threaten and destabilize Saudi Arabia. So they're actually giving long-range missiles to the Houthis that can range into Saudi Arabia. Now, I mean, it's a very, very difficult country. It's very difficult to start a war. So it's a very inconclusive war. And, of course, the Iranians are just throwing fuel on the fire because it threatens Saudi Arabia, which is their enemy. It allows them to threaten the line of communications through the Red Sea, which is very important to the world. And so it became an important surrogate for the Iranians. And what's the reason why it's kind of flared up again is when Biden came into office to try to kind of bring, peace to the region, he basically cut off arms sales to the Saudis to punish them. And then he took the Houthis off the terrorist list to essentially allow them to have foreign aid and humanitarian aid and everything else. And it was a way essentially of turning to the Iranians and saying, look, we can play ball here. We can work together. And what's happened is because not only did he kind of give the Houthis the get-out-of-jail-free card, but because he allowed all this money to flow into Iran from basically not enforcing sanctions and giving them sanctions relief, giving them money for hostage and everything else, the Iranians now have a ton of money to give the Houthis, and so essentially they've turned around and weaponized that to destabilize the region. And we say, okay, so Biden. Not that there's much of a difference. Biden told them to knock it off. Of course, they didn't. So we did this campaign, a bombing campaign. But then two things happened of note in the last 2 days. One is the Houthis attacked an American warship. Now, the missile was shot down, but they were aiming at an American warship. So obviously they didn't get the memo. And the second thing was we just interdicted a major arms shipment from Iran to the Houthis. So again, if the goal was to deter this from happening, none of this worked. And you might ask, well, what do the Iranians want to get out of this? And I'll just give you the nightmare scenario just so everybody's prepared for that. So why are they creating all this havoc? Because in the end, they know they can't close the Red Sea, that the navies of the world can keep it open if they really want to.
Mm-hmm.
They can't drive Israel into the sea. Hamas is never going to do that. So why are they doing this? What I believe, it may not happen, but I believe it's certainly a possibility, is the Iranians will say, oh my God, look at all this turmoil and chaos in the region. We have to defend ourselves. Therefore, we are becoming a declared nuclear power. I mean, they already have the capacity to build nuclear weapons and declare themselves a nuclear power. They create this chaos. They use it as an excuse to declare themselves a nuclear power. It's right in the middle of the election. The Israelis aren't going to attack them. We're not going to attack them. And then whoever is the president's January walks in the door facing the reality of Iran's a declared nuclear state, and U.S. policy is we don't allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, and they're basically going to look at us and say, what are you going to do about it? I think that's where we're headed.
Well, I asked you to tell us what needs to happen for people to understand what was really at stake in November. That sets the table quite nicely, I would say. I've got a map up here for the people who are watching us on our stream so that they can kind of listen into when you're talking about these different areas. People aren't familiar with this part of the world. And when you look at how small these countries are and how big Iran is comparatively, Saudi Arabia is there as well. Israel is just this tiny little place to the west of these different countries. And you're talking about Iran. Every time we have these conversations weekly, it really boils down to me, like you're saying, Iran is invested in chaos, and America is supposed to be the stabilizing entity in the world, the leader in strength that says this is where we're going to be stable, and Iran is kind of pushing the buttons. And as soon as Iran is given an inch, they take a mile. Do you feel like they're speeding that up a bit, based on the election cycle timeline in the United States?
I don't have any classified information or data or anything, but that's certainly what you get from kind of reading the tea leaves. And I know a lot of Americans, why do we care? Everybody knows oil comes out of the Middle East. Let's just not buy oil from the Middle East. Well, the reason why we care is the Middle East is in the middle of everything. It's not just global energy supplies. And you may say, we can be energy independent. We don't need the energy. But the reality is, lots of other people in the world do, and we do business with them. And if they can't get energy, eventually it is going to rebound and impact on us. It's the pathway of global finance. It's the pathway of global maritime transport. It's like 90% of the world's goods and services are moved by sea. A lot of that goes through the Red Sea, through the Straits, through the Suez Canal, and we'll direct. So a Houthi bombing a ship in the Red Sea could affect your ability to pick up your toys at Walmart. I mean, it's just the reality of it. And all the global air transport lanes go through. Almost everybody that flies to Asia, you go through Turkey or UAE or Qatar. Global migration routes go through there. Food. So, a third of the world would starve if grain couldn't be shipped through the region to Africa and other places. So it does impact us. And now we're not the world's policeman. We're not the world's babysitter. Our job's not to baby-proof the world. But we, in our own interests, want to prevent things that are bad for us. I'm not saying the Middle East has to be the land of milk and honey, but it's in our interest that the region does not blow up in war, because that will impact us. And the biggest guarantor that we have of keeping the region from spinning out of control is the fact that we have Israel, which remains both a staunch U.S. ally and the most capable military power in the region there. So the survival of Israel is actually in the interest of the United States. It's also the key to stability in the region. So we do have some stuff at stake. Is it like defending the border? I mean, we don't defend our own border, but yeah. I mean, if you wanted, if you say, well, what's the first thing I'm going to say is defend the border? But yeah, peace and stability in the Middle East are important. And if it was done, this is the point. If it was done right, the U.S. Navy shouldn't have to be there.
Right. Aircraft
carriers shouldn't have to be there. American missiles shouldn't have to be flying. American troops shouldn't be shot at. Right? If you look after your interests correctly, you don't have to do these things. Mm-hmm. If you policed your streets correctly, the police don't have to be in shootouts with the cartels.
Great analogy.
And that's why we are what we are, because we're not doing foreign policy right.
When people are watching the primary campaigns for the Republicans, the Ukraine conversation, the funding for Ukraine is the most politically talked about foreign policy concern. And it makes me wonder sometimes if it's even a distraction. How does Ukraine fit into what's going on with these attacks, with Iran, with Russia? Where are you at on Ukraine right now?
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, I think it's headed to I already think it is. It's a stalemate. So people can argue Ukraine policy all they want. It's a stalemate. That's not going to change. There's going to be a free and independent Ukraine. The Russians aren't going to be able to conquer it. The Ukrainians are never going to be able to fight back and get all their territory. That's just the reality of where we are. I think that reality will continue. I think the U.S. will continue to support Ukraine because it's in our interest to do so. If you actually unpack the Ukraine debate, 99% of it is about the pathetic leadership from this president, how he's exploited the issue, taken advantage of it, driven up the debt, and that really held the allies to do their fair share in burden sharing. It's not really about whether we should have a free and independent Ukraine or not. We can all talk about Ukraine, but honestly, my opinion, Ukraine's on autopilot. The big place we need to watch is the Middle East, and the big thing where we're going to need policy shifts and changes is in the Middle East. What are we going to do with Iran? We just literally cannot have the policies that we're having now. So I think those are the big issues. I think even if you listened to Donald Trump in Iowa, and when he talked about the war, he said, well, we need to end this war. And it wasn't talking about abandoning Ukraine or turning things over to Russia. It was about talking about the suffering and the horror the Ukrainian people have experienced and wanting that to end. So I don't think Ukraine is the bellwether issue, to be honest.
Last question for you before we have to let you go. We're speaking with Jim Carafano with the Heritage Foundation. Does the domestic policy of homeland energy production dramatically affect our relationships and the makeup, the power structure, the economies of the world?
Well, what being energy independent and being a massive energy exporter do is it puts us in the driver's seat. It makes us the wedge producer. And that allows us to drive the market and drive behavior. And it also doesn't make us dependent on anybody else. And so strategically, it puts us in a much stronger position. And you know what else it does? It delivers to Americans reliable, affordable, abundant energy, which is the number one thing we need to power our economy.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of options for a Republican, at least, to get in there in November to dramatically and very quickly change the direction of this country. Iowa being done yesterday, and then hearing more about these attacks on a foreign stage, it just makes me lean in even more to what's taking place, because we have the opportunity in America to make a change in November. Hopefully we do. Thanks for being with us, Jim.
You bet. Thanks.
Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye. Jim Carafano, the senior counselor to the president and E.W. Richardson Fellow for International Engagement at the Heritage Foundation.